What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Danielle Hallen and I am back with another true crime video. And today we're speaking about a case that has had me so messed up for weeks now. I hadn't known about this case until I just so happened to stumble across a news video on it while I was researching for an entirely different case. And the title alone just kind of stuck out and had me sick to my stomach. And I kept thinking to myself, like, there's no way, surely not. Like, someone can't possibly be this evil, but I was so wrong. We're going to be speaking about the torture and death of 15-year-old Timothy Ferguson by his own mother and brother, the people that he should have been able to rely on. Now, his mom, Shanda Vander Ark, just went to trial last month, and she was sentenced last week to life in prison, and some of you may have even seen video clips that went viral of Shonda puking on stand after seeing an image of what she had done to her own son. Timothy's older brother is also facing charges, and he testified against his mom, and he was supposed to be sentenced this last Monday, but it ended up being pushed back to the end of February. It's just a whole lot. This case is so bad. It is so graphic, so heinous, and I honestly can't understand how any of this managed to happen. That is never how a child should live, and if all I can do is make people aware of what his family did to him and it helps prevent this from happening to even one other child, I'm going to do it. So this is your warning. This is really, really tough to hear. Every trigger warning imaginable applies to this case, so let's get into the details. At 6:37 a.m. on July 6, 2022, officers from Norton Shores Police Department in Michigan responded to a 911 call on the 4000 block of Marshall Road. There had been a frantic call from a 44-year-old mother, Shonda Vander Ark, claiming that something had happened to her son. Authorities arrived and were led down to the basement of the home, and to give you just a quick idea of what the layout was, there were two bedrooms down there, one that belonged to Timothy's younger brother, who is referred to as G, and another for his older brother, 20-year-old Paul. There was also a bathroom and a closet, and the common space, according to Shonda, was Timothy's room, and there was a bunk bed in there and a desk. And there, in the middle of this common space floor, was the body of 15-year-old Timothy Ferguson. Authorities were shocked and couldn't understand how a young boy could end up inexplicably deceased like that. And they looked, obviously, right to Shonda Vander Ark for answers. Now, Shonda seemed equally as confused and upset as the police initially. She told them that she had been woken up at around 5:30 a.m. that morning by a loud banging noise coming from the basement. She said that she made her way downstairs to see where the noise came from and ended up finding Timothy on the floor after he presumably fell from his bunk bed. Shonda claimed that he was alive and well at this point. There was nothing wrong with him, so she picked him up, tucked him back into bed, and went on with her morning. Then about an hour later, at 6:30 a.m., Shonda said she went back down to the basement to just check on Timothy, and to her horror, he wasn't breathing. So she immediately called 911 and began to perform CPR. Now, she went even further and began to explain to authorities that Timothy had numerous diagnoses, including ADHD, autism, bipolar disorder, motor and mental impairments, and the list went on. And she admitted that she had been struggling quite a lot with him over the last couple of months. And then, out of nowhere, to their shock, she also said that she believed she knew what may have led to his death, and that it had all started about 7 months prior. Shonda began to explain to authorities that in early January of 2022, her husband, Timothy's stepfather, who had been living in the home with them at the time, suffered from a stroke. His stroke took a huge toll on him, forcing him to move back in with his parents for proper care. And according to Shonda, Timothy did not take well to the change at all. This allegedly devastated him, and it led to a hunger strike of all things. And so Shonda explained, eventually we were able to get him out of it, and he had been totally fine for months, but apparently for some unknown reason, over the last few weeks, Timothy's hunger strike had started again. She told police that she had tried everything at this point to get him to eat. Finally, the night before, she said that she put her foot down. She told Timothy if he didn't eat, she was taking him to the hospital right away. She said that Timothy ended up agreeing to eat a few pieces of toast, so she's like, all right, that's a win for me, put him to bed for the night, and had no idea that she was going to find him dead the next day. Shonda said that she worried that maybe the hunger strike had led to his death. Paul, Timothy's 20-year-old brother, was also in the home at the time police arrived. And when he spoke to police, he corroborated everything that his mother said. He said that Timothy was in fact on a hunger strike and that he must have died from that. But as police began to look around and ask more questions, they felt that there had to be something else going on here. Numerous things around the home, even just from a quick glance, were alarming. Timothy's body showed signs of abuse, malnourishment, and possibly imprisonment. Timothy was so emaciated that you could literally see every single bone in his body clearly. He was pale, he had numerous bruises. This wasn't the result of a hunger strike that had been going on for like a week or two at this point. Again, this was something more. Timothy was also dressed in clothes that were multiple sizes too big with a belt wrapped tightly around his waist to keep his pants on. And he was also wearing an adult diaper. Police asked Shonda about his appearance because it was startling, and she again just reiterated it's due to the hunger strike and said that the diaper was due to accidents he would have stemming from his disabilities, which obviously is understandable, but the diaper made the overwhelming smell of urine and feces coming from the small closet in the basement that much more alarming. Now, this small closet was right off of the common space, and it was entirely empty except for a tarp. And oddly, there were what appeared to be motion sensors on the door of the closet, as well as motion-activated cameras. So police again asked Shonda, why on earth do you need those things on a closet door? And she told them that she had an explanation. She said that she had sewing equipment that she needed to keep safe and locked away because the kids, including Timothy, would get into it. Which again, could be a plausible explanation, except that authorities immediately noticed the sewing equipment she was speaking about was very obviously sitting in the common area accessible by anyone. There was nothing in this closet. Authorities continued their search and just kept on finding odd things, including a pair of handcuffs sitting in a drawer right beside Timothy's bed. And when police asked Shonda about this, she brushed it off like everything else so far and said that Paul, her oldest son, the 20-year-old, had bought them for a TikTok video and that they had never been used for anything nefarious. It was just all for fun. Police did check the bunk bed to see if there were any signs that the handcuffs had been attached to it, like rubbed at the finish or anything like that, but they weren't able to find anything, so they're like, okay, maybe that's the case, and they kept on moving. But they ended up finding more cameras placed throughout the entire room, and at this point, the sheer number and placement of them was becoming suspicious, so as I'm sure you can guess, Shonda had an explanation for those as well. She told police that her youngest son, who was referred to as G, was 7 years old, and she said that she had installed the cameras because he had a tendency of running around the house naked. However, she claimed that he did this while potty training, which would have been years earlier. So again, you have this weird explanation for something that's there that's halfway plausible, but also when you look deeper into it, makes pretty much no sense. Police then made their way to the bathroom in the basement, and in there, it was disturbing. There were multiple dirty diapers all over the floor, adult dirty diapers like the one Timothy had been in. The shower curtain was missing, and on the bathroom counter, there were zip ties, another camera pointed directly towards the bathtub, and a bottle of hot sauce, which out of all of those things, Shonda wanted to explain the hot sauce most of all, saying that Timothy liked spicy food, so maybe he was the one to put it there. But the last time she saw it, it had been up in the kitchen. So authorities at this point are like, okay, well, we want to go see the kitchen. So they made their way upstairs, and right away, they noticed that there were locks on the refrigerator, the freezer, some of the kitchen cabinets, but Shonda again had an explanation. It was because of Timothy. For his safety. She claimed that Timothy would sneak food that he wasn't supposed to have, so she had no choice but to lock most of it up. But she explained that there was always a pantry unlocked that he had access to, so it wasn't anything alarming. She was just keeping the things that could harm him locked away. At this point, police knew this is a load of crap. Something is wrong here. Even if Timothy had been on a hunger strike, how did it get to the point that he possibly died from it before his mother got him help? And between that, the cameras, the closet, it really felt like this house had been a prison. And then her whole story started being thrown into question when some of the facts that she had given in her story of what happened to Timothy weren't really adding up to the details they were finding. Medical examiners announced that based on rigor mortis, Timothy had been dead for hours. There was no way at all that Shonda saw her son alive alive and well like she claimed after he fell out of his bunk bed at 5:30 in the morning. He had been deceased for hours by the time 5:30 in the morning rolled around. And upon hearing this, Shonda started to backtrack. She spoke to a second police officer explaining that she just got the hour wrong, that, she was just tired. It was definitely something 30, but she was no longer certain that it was 5:30. Now, based on her story, police asked Shonda to see photos of Timothy from before his stepfather had left the home, to see his body condition, amongst other things. They wanted to, corroborate what she's saying, that he was totally fine and went on a hunger strike and all these things. But Shonda didn't have a single one. She had photos of every single one of her children, just not Timothy. Authorities documented what evidence they could, and by the following day, they had a warrant to search the entire home to collect more evidence. And they immediately noticed more alarming things. The remaining cameras, alarms, motion sensors, anything that had been left behind the day before were now conveniently missing, including all of the alarms and sensors that had been on the closet door that Shonda and Paul referred to as the, quote, small room. That same room that authorities kept drawing themselves to because of that overwhelming smell of urine and feces. So as they collected evidence, including phones and camera footage, they decided to dig into the background of Shonda and her family, and they were shocked at what they had found. Timothy had seriously fallen through the cracks, and legally, he wasn't even supposed to be in Shonda's care, or honestly, lack thereof. According to records, back in 2012, Shonda and her 4 children, including Timothy, had been living in Oklahoma. And that year, she had been in the middle of a custody battle and a divorce. And in the midst of all of this, Shonda ended up being investigated for child abuse, involving Timothy, who was 5 years old at the time. According to police files, numerous teachers from Timothy's school had called in after hearing the news to give their statements. And in these, we do get a bit of a glimpse about what the abuse within the home possibly was. While a lot of the names are redacted, so I can't say for certain, these teachers all said that the allegations, when it comes to the child abuse happening within the home, were that Paul, and his name was not redacted, had been sexually assaulting one of the other siblings. And context clues seem to possibly indicate that Timothy was the potential victim. According to a psychologist at the school, the local elementary and middle school that the family attended, Paul and the alleged victim were not allowed to be in the same school because of it. Now, while not much of this is public, what we do know is that the results of the abuse investigation ended up being a recommendation that Shonda have all of her custodial rights completely terminated. But instead, it seems that they came to some sort of agreement that would look better on paper for Shonda. Shonda would voluntarily leave the home and her children in the custody of their father, and she would personally waive her custodial rights. And from that point on, Shonda was only allowed supervised visits with her kids, which totaled to 3 hours with them a month. The only people that seemed to speak on who Timothy was as a person or really knew him at all were his teachers, saying that he was a sweet, smart boy that was eager to learn and he craved attention at school. He wanted all of the hugs. He wanted someone to listen to him. And all of the statements claimed that Timothy seemed to view school as his safe place. He would always show up dirty with oversized, unclean clothing on, and they would often have to have a change of clothes for him. They would launder his dirty clothes while he was at school, and they even claimed that he would have to shower at the school multiple times a week. He was always hungry, and oftentimes teachers would fill his backpack along with his sisters with food for the weekend, worried that they weren't being fed. And all of these concerns were brought up numerous times to Timothy's stepmother, along with different programs that may help and, concerns over the uncleanliness. And every single time this help was declined and there was some sort of excuse as to why this was going on. And while teachers said that they saw no sign of physical abuse against Timothy, they felt that all of the children had been experiencing severe mental trauma. And a handful of these school employees had in fact reached out to DHS with concerns, but nothing ever seemed to come from it. Now, eventually, after all of this settled down, Shonda decided she wanted to uproot her life and move to Michigan. I mean, she didn't have any of her kids living with her anymore. She saw them very, very little. There was nothing stopping her from just up and leaving. And so she decided to move to Michigan. Eventually, she ended up in a relationship with Adam, and they went on to have G, the little boy. And Shonda, by all appearances on the outside, was a successful family woman. She attended law school. She was top of her class, passed the bar on the first try. She then went to work a handful of different courthouses in the local area, and most recently had been working as a law clerk in Newaygo County. Then calls started to come in from those that had gone to school with Shonda, as well as from her coworkers, that started to shed a little more light on the kind of person that Shonda actually is. Classmates called in to say that while attending law school with her, Shonda was known for being a gigantic bully, to the point that she was declined a position as a mentor within the school because of her, quote, negative attitude. Even found an article that had been written by the founder of the same school Shonda went to undergrad at that interestingly spoke about relevant punishments. And this article specifically mentions using hot sauce as a punishment tool on children. Her coworkers also didn't have many great things to say about her. It was claimed that Shonda was not very professional in the work environment. Most of the time, she wasn't even working. Instead, she was just intently watching her phone or computer, which everyone thought was super strange. And upon further investigation, they found out that she was actually watching her kids through a surveillance system in her house that connected to her phone. And coworkers had overheard her yelling at her kids through the system numerous times when they would leave their room. They were told that they weren't allowed to be out of their rooms at the same time. People overheard her telling them that they couldn't have more food, amongst other things. And when Shonda would talk about her kids to these different coworkers, she never even called them by name. She referred to them as the 20-year-old or the middle child or the problem child. Shonda had even admitted to one coworker that she had punished the middle child, aka Timothy, by making him stand outside in the cold. And when this coworker was like, excuse me, Shonda backtracked and said that he was bundled up and he wasn't out there for very long, basically downplaying the entire situation. And another time, Shonda told this coworker that Timothy kept her up all night by setting alarms off in the home, and to punish him, she would make him stand up all night with his nose against the wall. So these were the kinds of things that people knew Shonda for. She had started an entirely new life. And then in 2019 or 2020, when her son Paul turned 18, custody arrangements no longer had to be upheld, so he made the decision to move to Michigan to live with his mother. Then they got another alarming call from Timothy's half-sister. She told police that Shonda had reached out to her oldest son, telling him that Timothy had passed away in his sleep. This is how she broke the news to all of his siblings. And shocked, they all tried to reach out to Shonda to figure out what exactly happened, get more information. But at this point, Shonda's phone had been taken by the police, and so they had just decided to call the police department to get their answers. Timothy's half-sister said that Paul had only moved in with Shonda because he didn't want to grow up. He wanted and expected everyone to take care of him, and Shonda was apparently the biggest enabler of all of that. She said that Paul was the biggest bully she had ever met, and his favorite thing in the entire world was to torment Timothy for some unknown reason. And that if he was involved in whatever happened to Timothy, she believed that he was fully complicit. He had not been forced to do a single thing. And a year later, on May 27th, 2021, Timothy, who was only 14 years old and legally should have remained with his father, somehow ended up back in Shonda's hands. So she had him in her custody for only a year when he died. Now, allegedly, and this is according to Shonda, Timothy's father reached out to her saying that Timothy was pushing his buttons, he was unmanageable, and that she either needed to take him in or he was going to be handed over to child services. So despite her child abuse investigation in Oklahoma and despite having zero custodial rights over Timothy, she took him into her home. Timothy's siblings also ended up telling police more on the family's history. According to the half-sister, Timothy was mainly raised by her mom, so Timothy's stepmom, from the time he was 2 years old until he moved in with Shonda. Eric, his father, apparently played no part in parenting him. She said that he was either at work or just couldn't be bothered. So she claimed that her mom went above and beyond to try to take care of Timothy and get him the help he needed to be successful in life. But after years of doing this all on her own, she went to Eric claiming that she was overwhelmed and depressed and she needed help. But the best solution that Eric could come up with was to send him off to his mom or hand him over to DHS. But Timothy's half-sister also didn't have great things to say about Shonda either when it came to their history. She said that Shonda was never an active parent either, just like Eric, and that most of the time her oldest son was caring for all of the kids by himself. And when Shonda was present, it was usually in some weird sort of sexual way, that she spent most of her time sitting on the couch writing books about her fetishes, and she had even shown the kids some of these books. So you can see how twisted the family history is. There, things seemed to go completely dark. According to what authorities found, there was never a legal custody transfer done for obvious reasons. It never would have been approved. So no one knew where he was, whose care he was in, or if he was receiving proper care the entire time he had been in Michigan. And because Shonda had no custody, she wasn't able to put him into public school. He wasn't able to receive medical care for any of his conditions. So Timothy was found dead in a home that he legally never should have been in the care of a mother who had been investigated for child abuse. So authorities were very right in their feeling that something was not right. Police collected whatever evidence was left, and Paul ended up being brought back into the police station to be questioned a second time. And from my understanding, they also questioned the little 7-year-old, and all the information they were getting was not good. G told authorities and CPS caseworkers that his brother Timothy was a bad boy. He went on to explain extreme abuse of Timothy and that he believed Paul and his mom's punishments made Timothy die. He said that his mom was in charge unless she was at work, and in that case, Paul would be the one to punish Timothy, and that when Paul was in charge, he was very, very angry and aggressive, and it scared both himself and Timothy. When they directly asked him if he spoke to his mom about what had happened to his brother, he said that he wasn't supposed to talk about it. Paul started to change his story. He began to admit that Timothy didn't sleep in the bunk bed in that common area like it was claimed. Instead, he admitted that Timothy had been sleeping in that closet under the basement stairs, that same room emanating that awful smell. But he followed that up saying what his mom had said so many times to police prior, that it was all for Timothy's safety. According to Paul, he had been unscrewing the bolts, making the bunk bed dangerous, and so they said they had no choice but to get him to sleep in the closet. And then when asked about the closet being an appropriate place for someone to sleep, he said that Timothy actually enjoyed it and preferred it, that he was the one who chose to go in there in the first place, and they put a mattress in there to ensure his comfort. And so authorities like, okay, well, what happened to the mattress? Because last we saw, there was only a tarp on the floor. And then he went on to say, well, yeah, but Timothy ended up tearing up the mattress, so again, safety hazard, and we had no choice but to take it out, leaving him to sleep on nothing but the floor and that tarp. It just seemed to be one excuse after another as to how Timothy became a prisoner in his own home, until finally Paul threw in the towel and admitted it all. And what Paul ended up telling investigators is hands down the most sadistic, awful that I've ever heard in my whole life. And by July 8th, Shonda Vander Ark was arrested and charged with open murder and first-degree child abuse.
Oh, okay. So that's what that was about. So please, take care of yourself. He's a respectful officer. He's assuring me he's going to do a medical screening. I know you got medical problems. You have to take good care of yourself. This is a manageable problem. The law says you're presumed innocent. You know that. Okay? So don't assume the worst. Assume the best. Okay? But take care of yourself. I'll be back in touch with you as soon as
You're going to be charged with child abuse right now. I believe it's the first or second degree. So it is a felony. So you won't be able to get out of jail until you see the judge, until the warrant paperwork's down there, okay? Which will probably be tomorrow. All right.
Sorry.
No, I'm the bearer of bad news right now. You know? Yeah, it's been a bad couple days.
It's been bad 6 months. I had a stroke 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Nope, you're all right. I do have to handcuff you, but I'll do it in the front.
If my blood sugar crashes, I need that.
Are you diabetic?
I'm reactive hypoglycemic.
Okay. You take medication for that?
No. I have a service dog normally, but I didn't bring him.
Yeah.
For good reason.
All right. I can let you have that all the way up until the jail.
Oh.
Oh.
Do I leave it there, or what do I do with it?
Yeah, I just gotta throw it away somewhere. You can leave it there. That's fine.
Sorry.
Oh, you're right. I just wanted to give you this chance to, if you wanted to drink it or not.
I don't think that's a good idea.
Not from all the gagging. She's feeling a little lightheaded.
No, my stomach's really upset.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
Go ahead, follow her.
You can grab some shoes.
According to police, she had tortured her son, and that is what really led to his death. When the autopsy was revealed, people got a glimpse into just how bad the situation was. According to the medical examiner, Timothy's cause of death was malnourishment due to dehydration and starvation, as well as hypothermia. At 15 years old, this teenage boy only weighed 69 pounds, putting him in the 0 percentile for weight, 0. And based on evidence that they had found, they believed Timothy had not been properly fed a meal since January of 2022. And unbeknownst to pretty much everyone so far, police had hundreds of texts between Paul and Shonda, footage from the cameras that showed all of the horrid things that had happened in that house. Just a week after his mother's arrest, Paul was arrested as well, facing charges of first-degree child abuse. He had been involved in the horrors of that house, which is why he knew so much to tell authorities, and he agreed to testify against his mother in hopes that he would receive leniency during his own trial. And this entire thing ended up turning into a finger-pointing mess. In December of 2023, Shonda's trial began, so literally just a little over a month ago, and what had really happened to Timothy was finally being revealed. And the entire trial, I watched most of it online, and I have a majority of it linked down below. It's split up into so many different segments, but Court TV has some of it. It's kind of all over the place. But it is very difficult to watch, just as a warning right now. But both Paul and Shonda tried to seemingly defend their awful actions the entire time. Neither of them seemed willing to take full responsibility. And Shonda's attorney brought forward the most ridiculous defense. He basically claimed that she had no idea what she was doing would harm Timothy, let alone cause his death. Her attorney went on to explain that she was just a mother struggling to care for a high-need son, and she did the best that she could, while also claiming that what did happen to Timothy in that house was all the idea of her 20-year-old son, Paul. So you can see how this is just already so contradictory. And Paul took the stand and he claimed the exact opposite. He said that Shonda was behind all of this and he was just doing what he was told. Paul went on to explain that the abuse towards Timothy started about a month after Adam moved out, and that was January of 2022, so around February of 2022. And even then, there really was no explanation from either of them as to why exactly they decided to start it. It's like they just woke up one day and they're like, well, no one's here to tell us no, so we're going to start torturing this 15-year-old boy. When Adam moved out, there was an obvious dynamic shift, and Shonda was now the sole provider for 3 children and herself. And so I guess Paul decided to get a job working night shifts so that he could watch his brothers during the day and then help provide for the family at night. And he said that almost right away, the task of punishing Timothy fell into his lap, which is just the absolute craziest thing to me. When I heard that, my mind was just blown. Normally, when you leave your kids for the day with someone, you say things like, make sure they eat enough, or make sure they're well taken care of, not make sure you punish them enough, which is apparently exactly what Shonda's orders were. Text messages between Shonda and Paul show that they had several conversations around this February time period, speaking about finding ways to prevent Timothy from eating. According to Paul, when nobody was looking, Timothy would sneak up to the kitchen and steal sweets and pretty much anything he could get his hands on. Quote, he was sneaking food that was not necessary at the time, and it was solved by placing locks on the fridge, freezer, and pantry. And it seems that this first little decision that they made, this first taste of control they got over Timothy, would lead to these months of abuse and torture and everything just escalating. From this point on, Timothy didn't get to eat real meals. It wasn't just keep him out of food when it's not necessary. It turned into, we're just not going to feed him at all.
We've seen a lot of text messages and references to hot sauce and hot sauce retrieved from the home. At some point in time, were you asked to start feeding him bread with hot sauce on it?
Yes,
And who asked you to do that?
Shonda.
Why were you giving him bread with hot sauce on it?
Because he was supposedly misbehaving.
And how would you, describe to the jury what you would do to do that and to make him eat the bread with hot sauce?
I would put it on bread, have him stand in the kitchen area near the back door and watch him eat until he finished.
And was he required to eat it until it was all gone?
Yes, sir.
Did it ever look like he wanted to eat the bread with hot sauce?
No.
Were there times where you were told that he could have something besides bread with hot sauce on it if he ate the bread with hot sauce first?
Regular bread, yes.
So he had to eat that bread with hot sauce first, and then he could have some regular bread.
Yes.
Did he have to wait a period of time before he could eat the regular bread, though?
Yes, sir.
What, do you remember about what that was? About how long?
30 minutes?
With taking out the bread out of the equation, was hot sauce used in some other fashion as a form of discipline for him?
It was poured directly into his mouth.
And who would do that?
Me or Shonda, me under her orders.
And it's just like what you sound like. How did you do that?
Had him open his mouth and poured it in.
There's some text messages. Do you recall a text message you exchanged with your mother in, I believe it's around April or so, where you've alerted her to the fact that he's eaten some part of a burger?
Yes.
Do you recall that?
Yes.
What was it? What part of the burger is it that he ate?
Just the crust.
And what was your mother's response when you told her that he had eaten the crust of that burger?
Make him throw it up.
Did you try to do that?
I tried at first, yes.
How did you try to do that?
Putting a finger into his mouth as instructed to the back of his throat to induce vomiting.
So who gave you the instruction to put your finger in the back of his throat?
Shonda?
We don't see a text message to that effect. Were you two also communicating by camera as well?
Yes.
The cameras had was it a two-way capability basically? You
Yes.
could talk to the camera or
You
something.
could
on
talk
the camera?
and they could hear. At certain times it could be activated.
Was there ever any other time where she instructed you to make Timothy throw up?
Yes.
About how many times did she instruct you to do that?
3 or 4?
This, in Shonda's words, sneakiness, would lead to the home being covered in cameras and motion sensors to be able to make sure that Timothy never found his way to food. Now, by April, Timothy, again desperate to eat still, had started to figure out the locks. He was managing to pick them open to get himself some sort of food. And with all the surveillance, Shonda and Paul inevitably found out about it. And this just led to more punishment for Timothy and more locks being placed in the kitchen. And this is when it seems to really escalate. Timothy slowly had everything taken away from him. Not just food at this point, it was everything. His bunk bed, his mattress, and eventually he was forced to sleep in that closet that they referred to as the small room on a tarp that Shonda laid down to protect the floor from his accidents. He had never chosen to sleep in the closet like Paul first claimed, even though that was not believable to begin with. It was all a part of this punishment for allegedly unscrewing a bunk bed. It was like every single thing Timothy did came with this absolute ridiculous punishment that took away his basic human rights. Timothy also ended up being confined to just the basement, another way to control him easier. But after a while of this, it turned into Timothy being locked up in that empty closet under close watch all day, every day. Sensors on the closet doors, the stairs, any movement Timothy made, they would know about it. He even had a motion sensor zip tied to his belt loop, trigger a loud alarm that set off his sensory disorder and would basically paralyze him. So at this point, it's like, is this alarm for you to know that he's going somewhere so you can punish him more? Or were you punishing him by setting off his sensory disorder? And all day long while Shonda was at work, she was, quote, intently watching him to see the suffering that he is enduring. All while she and Paul were in constant communication about what punishment Timothy would suffer next. Paul testified that Shonda eventually stopped giving Timothy his medications as well, and started to worry that others would see him in the state he was in after, months of starvation and torture, and say something to someone, and they didn't want to get in trouble. They didn't want anyone to know the realities of what was happening inside of that house. This led to Shonda taking away Timothy's iPad that he used for school. At this point, she homeschooled both children. She homeschooled Timothy and she homeschooled G. He was using his iPad to do school, and she worried that he was going to call for help or that he would be able to do something with it, film himself. There's no telling what she was worried about him doing, but she didn't want him to be able to do any of it. And so she took that away and started to just occasionally print off his schoolwork for him. Nobody outside of the family was allowed in the home any longer. And from the way it's described in court as well, there were even steps taken to prevent G from seeing Timothy, probably because he would frequently leave the home and spend time with his grandmother and his dad still. And I don't know what exactly those measures were. They weren't shared that I could find, but it's probably why Timothy was constantly locked in that closet. According to Paul, Timothy also wasn't allowed outside anymore because of this. Only on very rare occasions would he be allowed to go and walk the dogs in the backyard where nobody could see him. And something that I just find so interesting and stomach churning is that Shonda trained dogs. She had a service dog. She made YouTube videos during most of this. I think 5 months into all of this abuse that she was dealing out to Timothy, she had been making YouTube videos about training dogs. And I don't know why that pisses me off so bad, but it just does.
January, from the time of the stroke moving forward, was Timothy allowed to even leave the house?
No.
When, if ever, was he ever allowed to go outside?
To walk the dogs sometimes?
And when he would walk the dogs, where was it that he would walk the dogs?
In the backyard, out of sight.
Was there ever some physical discipline that was involved with him being outside as well?
Yes.
What was that discipline?
He was made to run up and down the patio stairs.
And those are stairs in the back of your house?
Yes, sir.
Are those visible at all from the front of the house?
No, sir.
Visible to anyone walking by on the street or driving by, anything of that nature?
No, sir.
There are some text messages referenced in there where there's a discussion about doing the stairs chasing style. What is that, if you remember?
Following close behind him to ensure he moves faster.
And who would be the one that would chase him if that was taking place?
I had to.
Timothy was also forced to spend his time doing wall sits or standing with his face against a wall for hours at a time. Sometimes he even stood with his face against a wall overnight as punishment while everyone else got to sleep. He also had been put in weighted vests and forced to clean the garage in his underwear. But don't worry, they made sure to close the door first so no one saw him. They even timed his bathroom breaks, giving him 1 minute to urinate and 5 minutes tops for everything else, which is probably half the reason they had him in diapers, because he couldn't freely use the bathroom as needed. Paul admitted that they would have Timothy get on his knees in the closet and put his hands on his head and stay this way for hours on end, all in the name of safety. He was forced to sit in ice baths, with Shonda telling Paul over text or through the cameras to ensure that Timothy didn't turn the water warm or, sit in a position that was going to be comfortable. The extent that they went to make sure that Timothy did not get a single moment of peace is monstrous. It wasn't just about, we're going to neglect him and leave him down there. It was figuring out new ways that they could hurt him, make him uncomfortable, make him feel unsafe. It was constant pushing. Paul and Shonda's text messages ended up being read out loud in court. And I could not believe what I was hearing. I didn't even listen to all of them, because hearing two people speak about their son, their brother, and the way that Paul and Shonda did, and not just that, I think more so it hit me so hard because they spoke about him like that to each other, but then they both tried to put on a victim suit while in court and cry and feel sorry for themselves. It pissed me off and enraged me to no end. Paul and Shonda spoke about how they believed that Timothy was faking all of his disabilities. I think that legitimately may have been for some reason why they chose to do this to him. They believed he was faking all of this. And Paul would even speak about how he was ready to kill his brother. And Paul testified on stand that he believed his brother did have seizures and things, like because he could see it himself. But because he couldn't physically see all his brother's other disabilities, he was faking them. He was faking autism. He was faking ADHD. What the f***? The text revealed just how callous and evil these two were, and how they bounced horrible ideas of torture back and forth as if they were discussing dinner plans. One text from Shonda reads, quote, "Please make sure you go downstairs regularly to make sure Timothy is not asleep before you leave for work. Maybe we should leave the light on. That way it'll be harder for him to fall asleep. Feel free to dump some cold water on him. I honestly don't care if you get a little rough with him." There's text evidence speaking about purchasing handcuffs to use on Timothy, the same ones that Shonda had just so straight-faced claimed, oh, those are for a TikTok for Paul. And they even spoke about the best ways to use zip ties as handcuffs. Paul gave one disturbing detail after another. What I have just said is legitimately not even the half of it. And he had gone along with all of this and genuinely wanted other people to believe that he was simply just doing what he was told. And he claimed to be remorseful, and he painted a picture that he had tried to do the right thing. Paul said that despite the fact he'd already been abusing his brother for months, that on June 13th, 2022, he had started to become worried about Timothy's emaciated state. I guess now that he's skin and bones. And evidence does show that he took a picture of Timothy and he sent it to Shonda, saying that he thinks they needed to start actually feeding him.
And I need you to look at a text message that you sent to your mother. It's got a photo that you took of your brother. You remember sending that text message?
Yes, sir.
For the record, this is People's 36A. This has been previously shown to the jury. Who took that photo of your brother?
Me?
And you sent it to your mother?
Yes, sir.
Why did you send it to your mother?
Because I was concerned with how thin he was.
That photo was taken on, do you remember what the date was?
Not the exact, no.
If your phone indicated it was June 13th, you'd have no reason to dispute that.
No, sir.
And you just became, again, the reason you sent it to your mother was why?
Because I was concerned about how thin he was.
You remember what your mother told you to give him after you sent her that photograph?
Bread?
And then is there a reference to bread and some peanut butter?
Yes.
So at that point, your brother's very skinny, right? Was he eating regular meals at that point?
No.
Were you still administering the hot sauce on the bread as a form of punishment for him during that time period?
Yes.
And did that continue all the way up until the time of his death?
Yes.
Did he ever eat any normal type of meal leading up to his death after you took that photo and sent it to your mother?
That day I made him an actual real meal, an actual peanut butter and jelly sandwich, as well as scrambled some eggs and put cheese in them.
Did you tell your mother you had made that meal for him?
No, sir.
Why not?
Because I didn't want her to be upset with me.
And you mentioned today that you fed Tim a good meal.
Yes.
Okay. Why is it, it's not in the police reports, right?
No.
And it's not in the interview that you did, right? There's no mention of it in your interview with Detective Pieskey, is that correct?
Was there?
Yeah, I'm sure. There's no mention of it, correct? If you don't remember, that's fine.
I don't remember.
Okay. There was no mention of it at the preliminary examination when you were under oath, correct?
I don't believe I was asked.
Okay, good. But you certainly didn't mention it, correct?
No.
But you took that, there was an opportunity to sneak him some food, and you snuck him some food according to your testimony today, right?
Yes.
All right. You work at Applebee's, right?
Yes.
Do they make food at Applebee's?
Yes. Unfortunately, I can only get one free meal, and I don't always remember my credit card because I don't have it on me.
Okay, this is 6 months. Right?
Yeah.
And you're concerned about your brother, right?
Sympathy slid in and out.
Okay. But you worked at Applebee's, right?
Yes.
And unlike this meal that you're telling us about now, you never took anything from Applebee's and snuck it home to your brother, did you?
No.
And you're on a bike coming from Applebee's to your home in Norton Shores?
Yes.
You had to pass a Walgreens or a convenience store, a gas station or something, correct?
At 1 in the morning, everything would be closed.
Gas stations wouldn't be closed, right?
The only one that I went by was the one at Meyer, and it was.
And you could stop you went by the gas station at Meyer?
And it was closed.
Was the Meyer itself closed too?
I don't know, I never checked.
Yeah, it's a 24-hour store, correct?
I don't know.
Did you ever go into any place before work or after work to buy your brother a candy bar to bring him home and help him out?
No.
While to some, this showed that he did have maybe some sort of idea that what he was doing was wrong and that he had the ability to do something right and may have been a pawn in his mother's game, others pointed out that he had never told this story to anyone else, not at the police when he confessed, not at the preliminary hearing. So a lot of people felt that he was just playing a sympathy game, victimizing himself as well to pin this all on his mom. Then finally, Paul got to the night before Timothy died. Paul testified that the afternoon of July 5th, 2022, he went to go and wake Timothy up, and immediately he said he knew something was very wrong. Timothy was unresponsive entirely. He began to scream at him, trying to get him to wake up, all while Shonda was watching from the cameras like some creepy overlord. Instead of getting help for this poor little boy that was on the brink of death, Shonda told Paul that she had a way to wake him up. An ice bath. Paul admitted that he had to drag Timothy from the closet to the bathroom, and he put him in the ice bath at around 2 p.m. He sat for a bit waiting for Timothy to be jolted awake by the cold, but there was nothing. Shonda, who was still watching on the cameras, then told Paul that she had another way to try and get him alert. She ordered Paul to go get a few frozen pizza rolls and then hold them just close enough to Timothy's face to try to see if it will cause some sort of reaction. She said that if he startled at all smelling the pizza rolls, that Paul needed to immediately pull them away. But none of this seemed to work. So Shonda introduced yet another horrific idea. So this is now 2 times and a few hours into her son being unresponsive. And she's had 2 separate ideas of how to help him, and neither of them was to go to the hospital, call an ambulance, or anything that would have actually helped her son. Instead, it was more ways to torture him. And this one really freaking takes the cake. She told Paul to put hot sauce on Timothy's genitals to wake him up. That is why that hot sauce had been in the bathroom. Not this, oh, Timothy loves hot sauce, he brought it in there. She knew damn well that she had told her other son the night before to pour some of it on Timothy's genitals as he was laying unresponsive in that bathtub. And this is apparently when Paul told his mom no for the first time. And it's always interesting to me where people decide to draw the line. So instead, Timothy was just left in the ice bath unresponsive. Paul was supposed to work at 4 p.m., but he had car troubles, so his mom took him to work when she got off at around 6, and the 2 exchanged text messages according to evidence throughout the entire night, including a text that was sent by Shonda at 11:30 p.m. And this text shows that Timothy was still in the ice bath. 9 hours later, he had never been taken out. 9 hours unresponsive in water, of all things? Are you freaking kidding me? Paul claimed that when he got home at 1 a.m., he didn't check on Timothy. So this to me also just pissed me off because I guess all the worry that he had that day, where he said he was so worried because his brother was unresponsive, I guess it all just was a load of crap because when he got home, he never thought to make sure Timothy had become responsive or was even breathing. Instead, he claims he just went straight to bed and woke up early the next morning to get ready for work, and that was when he was told by Shonda that Timothy had died. Paul claimed that Shonda at first wasn't even going to call 911. at all, and that he himself tried to resuscitate and it wasn't working. And so eventually, I guess the agreement was made between the both of them that they had no other choice but to call 911, but they weren't going to tell the truth about what happened. Paul was then told by Shonda to drag Timothy out of the closet because, again, no, he had never been in his bunk bed. This whole falling out of the bunk bed story was a load of crap, and she ordered him to get Timothy dressed before they called 911. Shonda ordered him to tell police that Timothy had been on a hunger strike, and finally, 18 minutes or so later is when they made the call. Paul said that after police left that first day, Shonda began storming around the entire house, ripping down every single camera, motion sensor, and alarm that may have captured what had actually happened to Timothy and could be used as evidence against them. So that's why all of them went missing, even though it seemed pretty obvious what probably happened when I first said it. And finally, at the end of his testimony, Paul was asked a direct question. I'm going to play it for you here.
Is there, as you sit there right now, do you love Timothy?
I suppose I didn't love him enough.
No,
It's
that's
why
not
I'm trying to bring justice for him.
Just a moment, I don't know.
But can I say that I loved him during the time
You loved
before
him?
his death?
Yes. Did you love him before his death?
With all the ways I acted, I cannot.
Okay. Let me
Unfortunately.
ask you this. When did you start feeling this way? While he was alive or after you found out that the way he was being treated killed him?
After?
So while the time he was alive, did you think you were killing him?
No.
You told Detective Peiske that we didn't want this. We loved him so much.
That was what I thought, but it's not true.
Paul's entire testimony, he seemed to be honest, but he also still seemed to be deflecting a lot of the reality of what he had been a part of. It was like Paul relied on using bits of truth because they knew they couldn't deny it entirely, like I was speaking about before, and was willing to admit what had been done, but backed it by Timothy's uncontrollable and then justified and downplayed what they did to make himself feel less guilty. He was seeming to also follow the defense that his mom was using, that he had absolutely no idea what they were doing was going to hurt Timothy. But similar to what Shonda had done, he pointed the finger straight at her instead of himself and said that he believed that his mom had intended to kill Timothy the whole time. But he said that he never wanted any harm to come to his brother, which I wonder if that's how he was feeling when he was throwing his emaciated brother into ice baths for hours at a time. And he ended up eventually even comparing what he did and how this happened to Stockholm Syndrome.
To take his place right now, if I could give him his life back, I'd do it. I'd do it in a dadgum heartbeat. Do you remember saying that?
I stand by it.
Yes, sir. You never intended your brother to die, did you?
No.
And you came to the conclusion that your mother intended it after, right? Not while he was alive.
Yes.
You thought your mother was a good mom, didn't you? You told Detective Peiske that, didn't you?
Yes. As
And
well
you-
as the fact that I haven't got it diagnosed and I don't know how to explain it.
That's fine. Do
But I'd say it's something similar to Stockholm Syndrome.
Okay.
I have a desire to find a role model that, due to my own low self-esteem, I would do anything to make proud of me.
Okay.
And that's not an excuse, I know, but I feel like I'm glad that I was at least able to realize it so I can correct it.
And then Shonda took the stand. Her defense attorney, Fred Johnson, still banked on this idea that she had no clue what she was doing was going to harm her son, saying, and I cannot make this up, when he said this, I about dropped to the floor and stayed there for the rest of my life, okay? He said, quote, "They love this child, but they don't see what's before their eyes that you and I can see." I'm serious when I'm saying I about went into cardiac arrest. I believe being a defense attorney is such a rewarding job until you have to defend an absolute monster that you cannot deny is a monster. And then you have to say things like that in front of an entire courtroom with a straight face. And at that point, I feel like it is the hardest job on the entire planet. And I genuinely feel for that man. He then prefaced her testimony by saying that Shonda had memory issues and blackouts, so she likely wasn't going to remember much of what happened or be able to answer many of the questions she was asked, recognize texts she had sent, or photos, which is just incredibly convenient. She claimed on stand that she had ADHD, SPD, and OCD, and she also said that she very likely had PTSD after her husband's stroke, and all of this created mass blackouts in her memory. She even spoke about how she was hypoglycemic, and ironically, she said that it was so much worse after giving birth to Timothy, which I know sounds like an offhand small statement, but you can legitimately feel her anger and resentment towards her son, even speaking about his birth. It felt like everything that came out of her mouth, somehow Timothy ended up being blamed for it. Timothy didn't listen, or Timothy got into things, or Timothy was bad. And it was honestly very difficult to listen to. The nonchalance and the game she was trying to play sitting on stand was so crazy to me. And she maintained it for such a long time. Shonda proceeded to try and explain away all of the things that happened in the home, starting with Timothy even being in her illegal custody.
And when he sent, and how did it happen that you ended up with custody then?
My ex reached out to me stating that Timothy he could no longer handle him, that he was pushing his buttons, and that he needed to send him to live with me.
Okay. And you agreed to that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Had you ever lived with Timothy during his...
When he was younger, yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So you agreed to accept him into your home?
Yes, sir.
And who was living in your home at the time?
Myself, my husband, Adam, Paul Ferguson, and then my little man, G.
G. Okay, that's what we call G, correct?
It's really hard to do, yes, sir.
Okay, just do the best you can. Okay, so they're all living in your home, and then Timothy joins you, correct?
Yes, sir.
When Timothy's joining you, did your ex-husband ever make any effort to transfer legal custody to you?
We discussed it, but he never did actually sign anything, no, sir.
Okay. And without legal custody, how do you get Timothy into school?
You can't.
And without legal custody, how do you get medical treatment for Timothy?
You can't.
She claimed that she didn't understand that giving up her rights after that CPS investigation back in 2012 meant that she couldn't just bring Timothy back into her care in the future whenever she wanted. She legitimately was like, I didn't know, that wasn't my understanding of it, which is hilarious because a woman that went to law school, passed the bar on the first time, top of her class, and now she's in a courtroom facing something, and suddenly this woman who is so accomplished and works in very detail-centered work seems to not understand the law. And the prosecution threw this back at her every single chance they got. Like, the amount of just, like, aggravated statements that were thrown out. She explained that Timothy had been hard to manage after Adam left the home, something we've heard so many times at this point. And so everything that the police found was a result of managing his behaviors, that she wasn't doing anything bad, she was just trying to control him.
Putting him in an ice bath.
Because animals can't think the same way humans can.
So it's okay to do it on a human because they can think, right? They can think better than dogs can, so it's okay to put them in an ice bath. Is that what your testimony is? I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Is it okay to put a human in an ice bath because they can think better than dogs can, but you wouldn't do it to a dog?
I mean, based on the way you asked that, I guess the answer would have to be yes, but it's just it's not
Okay.
the way I think, so.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but you said you wouldn't do it for a dog, but we know you did it as a punishment for Timothy.
I never did personally.
But you told Paul to do it.
Yes. A couple of times.
And it never occurred to you, this is not a good idea. We shouldn't be doing this, right?
No, because it was the amount of ice was almost, I mean, it was non-existent, so.
So it's okay as long as it's not a lot of ice in the ice bath? Is that your testimony?
If it doesn't affect the temperature much.
Starts off as cold anyway, doesn't it?
Not originally. I don't know down the road, but originally that's not what I had told him to do. Because the first time that happened was before my husband's stroke. It was, Timothy had, we noticed there was no hot water. And we were like, what the heck? And I went down and I'm looking and I noticed the pilot light's not on the water, it's a gas water heater. I'm like, what on earth is going
This
on
ends
here?
with Timothy turning off the gas, doesn't it?
Yes, sir.
This part of the story, okay.
And he lied about it for
Let-
2 days, but
Let me just make sure I understand then. Is it your testimony that you put ice in an otherwise hot bath to cool it down?
yes.
Why don't you just start with warm water to begin with?
I honestly don't know. But that's what happened the first time.
So if you repeatedly refer in these text messages to them as cold and or ice baths, but that's what it was at the end, wasn't it? Cold baths or ice baths,
At
right?
the end, yes, sir, but not the first time.
Not the first time, you apparently needed ice to cool down a hot.
I have no idea what I was thinking. We'd all had to have cold showers for 2 days, and he'd lied to us about the water heater. I'd had to have the gas company out.
You remember taking the law school exam test?
The
LSAT?
LSAT? Yes. Oh, I hated that test.
Oh, I did too. Yeah, I agree with you there. There's a section on there that's about logic and reasoning, right?
Yes, sir.
And I kind of explained it to my friends as it's the, so-and-so can't sit next to so-and-so at a party, and this person can't sit on this side of the table, and this, so you have to map out all those things, right?
Yes, sir.
I'm guessing you scored pretty high on the LSAT, didn't you?
I scored pretty well. I mean, I got a scholarship to law school, so.
So for a test that serves your interest for getting into law school, you have no problem using logic and reasoning, do you?
I mean, I managed to score on it. I hated that test. I know I did not miss a single, there's a logic games section. I think I missed one question on that out of 25. And I think the reading comprehension was also something like that. So I think the lowest score was actually on the logical reasoning.
And yet somewhere before the time your husband had a stroke, logic told you that you should use ice in a hot bath. Is that your testimony?
Yes, sir.
But then after that, you do acknowledge that it was cold and or ice baths.
Yes, sir.
And that you encouraged Paul to pour water on Timothy, didn't you?
Just the one day.
Just the one day?
Yes, sir.
Which day was that?
The day before he passed away.
She went on to explain Timothy's unmanageable behaviors, saying that he would purposefully set off the motion detectors in the home, that he would make loud noises and intentionally act out to keep everyone awake. So in her mind, it made sense to force him to stay awake to get back at him. She said that he then began to take food from the fridge and freezer, saying that he was eating large amounts of bacon and ground beef. He had also eaten an entire 2-pound bag of frozen chicken nuggets. And so she said after all of this happened, she had no choice but to lock all of the food up in order to keep him safe, but maintained there was this pantry that he was allowed constant access to. But from what's being said, I guess that pantry only contained white bread and hot sauce. The prosecution had to remind her that just the day before his death, she had sent a text to Paul saying, quote, "Tell him if he actually sits up by himself and stays sitting up, he'll get some pizza rolls. Don't tell him it's only 2, and I'm okay if they're frozen rather than cooked." And the prosecution literally calls her out, and when I tell you, this moment will live rent-free in my head forever.
And a hunger strike is refusing to eat, right?
Yes, sir.
So he's refusing to eat food not long after your husband has a stroke, right?
Yes, sir.
Then you don't need to put locks on the refrigerator or freezer, do you? If he's refusing to eat.
He stopped. He started eating again.
He started eating again, so then you decided he's been on a hunger strike, he's eating again, so now we better lock up the food.
No, I did the locks to protect him because he could have killed himself eating the chicken nuggets. I didn't put the locks on after he did the hamburger or the bacon, but the chicken nuggets, it was raw chicken.
Chicken nuggets are cooked, aren't they? They're pre-cooked.
Are they? I didn't even think about that.
But it's okay if he has a frozen pizza roll or two, if he sits up, right?
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
So on stand, she cries over Timothy eating frozen chicken nuggets because it can kill him, but in text with her son, she encourages giving him frozen food. It's just such contradictory crap, and she's just lying through her teeth.
February 18th, 2022. Find out what he has snuck right the heck now. Because I know he has snuck all stuff since you weren't doing what you were supposed to. What do you mean you didn't know he was awake? You both should have been awake at 10:30. I am not happy. You know he wasn't just sitting there. Check the brownies in the kitchen. Check everything not locked away. Check where the flipping keys have been. So starting February, you had to lock up all the food. Make sure he's not getting into the brownies, right?
All of the food was never locked. There's no pictures of it, but one of the lower cupboards had quite a bit of canned food in it. And he actually would get into that and eat stuff out of cans as well. But there was never a lock on that lower cupboard. I don't know if they, I know they took pictures of it because I showed it to them.
So he had access to one cupboard of food?
The pantry wasn't locked the whole time, I know that.
But there were times the pantry was locked or had an alarm on it, wasn't there?
There was no alarm, I never got one for the pantry. I've heard the text messages, I don't remember there being a lock on the pantry, but I've heard.
228, check his breath. I can almost guarantee he's eaten something. He was chewing on something when he walked downstairs. You and I will be talking about this on a later date when we're both home. Paul's response, yes, he grabbed some chips. I know. So he wasn't allowed to eat chips on 228 at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Couldn't have some chips. Right?
I mean, I don't know what happened in that situation.
Well, you didn't say, make sure he didn't get into the frozen chicken nuggets because it might kill him. You said, find out what he's been into, and Paul says he's been into chips. Right?
That's what it says, yes, sir.
So I imagine the next text message then is, oh, great, that's fine, he can have some chips.
Well, no, the point of it was he was sneaking things. He knew better.
Couldn't have chips.
It wasn't that he couldn't have chips, it was that he would sneak things. It
So
was dishonest.
How would he earn getting chips?
He didn't have to earn them. All he had to do was ask. I was trying to teach him not to sneak. He snuck. It wasn't just food. He would sneak in the garage. He would sneak toys. He snuck around and messed with his baby brother's homeschooling materials. I've got like flashcards and stuff for him. He messed with those and got them all out of order.
March 4th is around the time that you acknowledged that he was in zip cuffs. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but I don't think we clarified your final text message where you said, you know what? We will start cutting off the ends once they are tight, so he can't do that. Is that one of the can't remember texts too?
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. March 19th. Okay, that only makes partial sense. What did he grab? LOL. Paul's response, I don't know, chips or something small he had in his pocket. Okay, tell him he just restarted his not eating again. That was you. March 19th. Tell him he's just restarted his not eating again. So he took chips. So the punishment for that is now he's not allowed to eat anything again, right?
I don't remember, sir.
Don't remember that.
Shonda also tried to make it seem like she wasn't keeping Timothy from being out in public, that she had absolutely nothing to hide. And she gave an example that she had tried to get him to go out and play with kids in the neighborhood. They agreed that he could come and play with them, but Timothy was the one who chose not to. And then they brought up the evidence they found that showed the lengths she actually was willing to go through to prevent anyone from seeing the results of their abuse. Shonda's youngest son, G, would regularly spend time with his grandparents at their home with his dad. And Shonda was so scared that someone would come into their home and see what they were doing that she tracked the grandmother's phone when she would come to pick G up. They apparently were on the same phone plan, and so she wanted to use this to her advantage. Texts were found where she would demand Paul get G ready and have him outside so that his grandmother would have no reason to come in, look at the house, look at Timothy, and call the police more than likely. And Paul was told to put Timothy with his nose against the wall so that he wouldn't come outside and be seen either. There were play-by-play texts of her panicking and rushing home to try to get there before the grandmother to be able to control the situation. And when she was asked about this, her defense was, well, I only tracked her while I was at the stoplights. As if the main concern in all of that was her being on her phone while driving. Every single time Shonda was told to read out texts in her own words of her abuse towards her son, the ideas that she came up with, not Paul, she would say that she didn't recall ever saying that. Every piece of evidence, she didn't recall seeing that. She could remember literally every single detail about every single thing until her memory loss kicked in when it came to her abusive behavior. When she was questioned about the hot sauce, she told the court that Paul had come up with the idea to punish Timothy using hot sauce. And then she was told to read her own text from hours before Timothy's death out loud, where she came up with that awful idea to hopefully have Timothy gain consciousness by pouring hot sauce on his genitals.
He tried to sneak food. I yelled at him, and then he became momentarily unresponsive, and then I saw this. He's bone thin, Mama, I think we need to actually feed him.
Okay. And what's your response to that?
I said, Kay, give him bread, please. And then I said, I hear you, give PB sandwiches and water. You want me to keep going?
Yeah.
Okay, the unresponsiveness is probably fake, but I see what you mean.
Okay. And go ahead and the next page.
Also, it's no wonder he's hardly capable of standing.
Then this one was photographs of his legs, right?
Yeah, and then I said, I'm in court.
So is it really your testimony that you never saw that photograph?
I do not recall seeing it. That was it. I feel like I want to throw up.
Correction to page 6011. Bottom text.
I wonder how it would feel to have that hot sauce on your private parts. I'm not saying touching there, not at all, but dripping a little bit there, is that horrible?
Did you have to ask that question?
I wouldn't think so. I don't remember that. I can't even imagine saying that.
But you did,
I know, but I can't even imagine it.
about your child, right? Who at that point was in the middle of an ice bath that had lasted at least 2.5 hours at that point, right?
The jury heard about the hot sauce from Lieutenant Joel Hoeksema. He brought in the bottle. It was called Elijah's Extreme Regret. This wasn't just regular hot sauce like your run-of-the-mill. This contained 2 of the hottest peppers, the Carolina Reaper and the Trinidad Scorpion, over 800,000 on the Scoville scale. And those 2 peppers only have 2 things hotter than them, Pepper X and then just pure capsaicin oil. So yeah, Shonda, it's pretty horrible. She went on to say that she hadn't actually fed Timothy the night before his death. She didn't confess to that, nor had she ever threatened to take him to the hospital like she'd originally said. Instead, she claimed that she had given him a warm bath, which based on the hypothermia, that's doubtful, and that she put him in the closet to sleep before finding him dead hours later. She still refused to acknowledge that she had starved her son to death and tortured him, that her actions led to what happened to him, excusing everything away and placing the blame on Timothy's behavior. The more this was blatantly shown to her, the more she began to panic. Eventually, prosecutors handed her a photo of her son, the same broken and battered body that she claimed to have given a nice warm bath the night before his death, and they asked her how she saw that and didn't think that something was wrong.
Not letting him sleep or he gets an ice bath, so he's got to be awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. You said that was because he would keep you guys up in the middle of the night or wake you up in the middle of the night?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Can you, and again, you did really well on the logic and reasoning portion of the LSAT exam. Can you explain the reasoning behind keeping somebody awake when they're keeping you awake?
To show them how it feels.
But they're already awake, aren't they?
It made sense to me, sir. That's now that you ask it, but it doesn't seem to make sense, but it made sense to me at the time.
You didn't actually mean that as punishment, that was just out of spite. You were just angry with Timothy for keeping you awake, weren't you?
No, it was meant as a punishment, sir.
But it's also a punishment for yourself because you have to stay awake as well, don't you?
I don't sleep much anyway, but yes, sir.
Or Paul has to stay awake, right?
Yes, sir. Paul's an insomniac as well.
You testified that you gave Timothy a warm bath the night before he passed away, that last night, July 5th. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
That was the first time you've told anybody connected to this case that you'd done that, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
You never told the police officers you did that, did you?
No, sir.
I imagine a warm bath sounds just like, it's just what it sounds like, right? You got him, you took him to the bath, you grew a warm bath for him, and you put him in the bathtub, right?
Yes, sir.
This is hours before he dies, right?
Yes, sir.
You look like that when you put him in the bathtub?
I'm sorry.
Gotta make me a moment.
Needless to say, the judge finished things up for the day. And the following day, when she was supposed to finish cross-examination, it was announced that due to her health, she would not be at the rest of the trial. Then finally, the jury heard from investigators that Timothy's final moments were caught on the cameras that helped hold him captive the entire time. It wasn't shown to the court because it was deemed prejudicial, but what happened was still explained. On the video, Shonda is seen placing a tarp down in the closet, and moments later she appears dragging Timothy by his arms into the room and onto the tarp after her alleged nice warm bath she gave him. At this point, Timothy is still alive, but barely. Lieutenant Hoeksma said, quote, "He was very thin, bones protruding. In particular, he wasn't wearing any pants, so I could see his hip bones and his knee joints very prominently displayed as she positioned him in front of the camera. I could hear Miss Vander Ark tell Timothy he is pathetic, then say, quote, 'But I already knew that,' end quote, when she drags him in, and she also makes a comment about him owing her the biggest apology in the world." After demeaning this child, she leaves for 15 minutes before coming back to berate him more because of the way that he's breathing. She didn't see his struggling gasps for air as him being on the verge of death, and she didn't run in like a mother would and take care of him. Instead, she came over and put her hand over his mouth and said, quote, "You don't need to breathe through your mouth like that. You're being a dummy." And then he didn't breathe at all. But yeah, I guess she loved him and just couldn't see what was right in front of her like we all could. The camera continued to capture the frantic cover-up thrown together over the next 18 minutes. Shonda saying, quote, "We have to tell them he's on a hunger strike. Put his pants on to make it look like he's been this way." Literally every dumb thing, every stupid, messed up decision they made that day was captured. Mother and son working together to cover up the sadistic abuse they had put this little boy through. And to know all of that and know that they both, especially Shonda, had the nerve to sit in front of the courtroom and continue to shame and blame Timothy and cry and feel sorry for themselves, it's disgusting. On December 15th, 2023, after only an hour of deliberation, without Shonda in the courtroom to face it herself, the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder. And the judge afterwards literally apologized to everyone in the room, the jury, the court reporters, to everyone who had to sit and hear the awful things that had been done to this little boy. It was devastating. When it comes to Paul, December 21st, he decided to plead guilty to first-degree child abuse. Again, he seems to be hoping for some sort of leniency because he sat down at his own mother's trial and said everything that had happened. But I'm not sure how lenient people are going to be because he did try to victimize himself in the middle of it and act like he tried to help one time in all of those, 7-8 months. But regardless, it seems that's what he's hoping for. And just last week, Shonda went in for sentencing. And while I know that this video is already very, very long, I want you guys to hear every single thing that this judge has to say.
Well, first and foremost, for the individuals here to speak on Timothy's behalf, I appreciate you being here. It kind of struck me throughout the trial, who was here for Timothy. And at one point in time, I worried that we may not have anyone to give a victim impact statement. And that to me made me very sad, quite frankly. Horrified more than anything, but quite sad. And I'm happy that two individuals took time to be here from miles across the country. And out of a horrible situation, that makes me feel a little bit better. Not much, but a little bit better. Mr. Johnson makes the same argument today that he made at the trial, that this was just negligence. This was her not understanding what was going on. She was really trying to do the punishment. She was trying to be a good parent, and she just didn't realize that Timothy was in such a horrible condition. And I found myself, especially during closing argument, quite frankly, finding myself almost believing that. And afterwards, after the trial, I sat in my car after leaving that day, trying to understand, why I could feel that way. And what I realized is that I wanted to feel that way because I didn't want to accept the reality of the situation here. And the reality of the situation here is that this person, Ms. Vander Ark, you intentionally engaged in these acts. This wasn't negligence. This is not understanding why, but you intentionally did this with a goal. And I think Mr. Johnson's correct. I don't believe there was an intent to kill here, because you would have lost the very thing that you wanted to torture. Without him, you have no one to torture, except maybe the younger children. So I don't believe you intended to kill him. I think you intended to continue on torturing him for as long as you possibly could. The why, I don't know. But all the information that I have in front of me, and I sat down, I really thought about this, and I looked over my notes from the trial, demonstrate that this wasn't negligence. This wasn't you not understanding what was going on. You look through, I read through every single text message of the exhibit, 2,000 plus pages, to try to understand what the heck was going through your mind. And what became entirely clear to me is that you knew exactly what you were doing. Immediately afterwards, when police arrive at the home, you immediately concoct this lie about he's been on a hunger strike. He was in the bed and I checked on him and I gave him some food and all this stuff. You got Paul involved in it. At one point in time, put baggy clothes on him. Put clothes on him to make sure, I guess, that he looks like he was actually wearing them, that he was hiding his poor condition, even though you already received text messages, weeks earlier of how bad he looked. You testified yourself how highly intelligent you were. In fact, that's the only thing that you testified to that I think was actually true. You were quite proud of that, boasting how intelligent you were. And not only that, but your actions in hiding this child. You hid him from his grandparents. You made sure that your other son, G, or little man as you call him, didn't see him. Those text messages talk about not wanting anyone to see him. I want to see him in that condition. You made sure that the garage was closed. When you sent him out there with no pants on to clean out the garage. I don't want to believe it because I don't understand. I can't wrap my mind. I've been trying now for this entire case to wrap my mind around how somebody could do something so horrific, not only to another human being, but to their own child. I'm a father myself. I love my kids. I love them with unconditionally. But quite frankly, there's a mother's love that I've seen that is striking. And anybody who's a parent who's married, most mothers, not all, but most mothers have such a strong love for their children. And to see what you did to your own child. I don't know if there's a word in the English language to describe how to describe it. The only thing I can come up with is just horrific. You intentionally and systematically tortured this child. And let's call it what it is. It's torture. You tortured this child. This wasn't punishment. This wasn't trying to curb his behavior. You tortured him. You monitored him obsessively. You all the things you did. I looked through every one of the messages. Bread with hot sauce, wall sits, up and down the stairs, sleep deprivation, ice baths, making him puke up food, monitoring his bathroom time, giving him 60 seconds in the bathroom if he went to urinated, or 5 minutes if he had a bowel movement. You made him sleep in the closet. You threatened to make him sleep in the garage. You put Tabasco directly in his mouth. You made him put his hands over the head. Made him work in the garage with no pants. And there's two other things that didn't come out in the trial that were in the messages. One, that there was talk of blindfolding him, depriving him of his physical sight as a punishment. And the last thing that struck me is just absolutely horrific in terms of your thinking. There was mentioning of giving him salt water as a punishment. One of the text messages talks about, hey, tell Paul or tell Tim that I'm not going to do the salt water punishment. And your reasoning for not punishing him was that, oh my God, we can't get him salt water, that could hurt him, that could kill him. But it was because you didn't want to give him another excuse to sit down on the toilet because he'd have diarrhea. He'd have diarrhea, and so he would have an excuse to sit down for a few more minutes while he was diarrhea from salt water. That was your excuse. That was your justification. Not that it would hurt him. And you did so for what? Because of some punishment. You wanted to regulate his food, even though you yourself testified that he didn't really gain a lot of weight. Toward the end of these text messages, you and Paul are talking about not wanting him to win. He's not going to win. I didn't allow pictures to be shown in open court of Timothy as he was when he died, because I didn't want people to remember him like that. Of all the things you took away from him, one thing I didn't want you to take away from him was at least some shred of dignity. And then I also thought, well, I'm a judge, I'm a human being. I don't know how to right this wrong. We try to do that. I try to do that from the bench every day. There's no way to right this wrong except impose a sentence that essentially takes away your freedom. And I thought to myself, what do I do? And I will tell you this. I'm choosing not to remember your son dead, looking like a Holocaust victim, but I'm choosing to remember like that. And you can't even look at him. That's how he was. A beautiful child with a lot of life in his eyes. That's who your son was. And you took that from him. I'm choosing to remember him as a happy individual with life, not as an individual. And that's the picture I want people to remember of your son. You took that from him. You took it from him. For what reason, I don't know. Mr. Johnson's right. There is something broken in you. I don't know what that is, but it doesn't negate what you did here. So, besides remembering him like that, I'm not going to let you hide in the darkness anymore. People know what you are now. They know what you did. You're not able to hide in the darkness anymore. Timothy won. And he won because we know what you did to him now. It's not hidden anymore. We know who you are. That's the way that I'm going to honor him. You don't win because justice, thank God, in this case prevailed. I can't even imagine if you had been able to resuscitate him. He'd be still suffering. So if there's anything I'm grateful for, would be that he finally passed away so you couldn't continue to torture him like you did. It's a sentence of the court. First as to count 2, child abuse in the first degree. Court sentences you 50 years to 100 years in prison. Credit for 575 days. Court is exceeding guidelines in this case. The court finds that the amount of torture that I've indicated in terms of the long-term suffering that Mr. Ferguson, Timothy went through justifies on a reasonable grounds to depart from the guidelines. Used to be the standard was the guidelines. If the guidelines didn't take into consideration all the elements, I don't think they would take into consideration the amount of absolute systematic, consistent torture that you engaged in here. I think that's enough reasons to justify departing from the guidelines. There's a $68 state cost, $130 crime victim rights assessment. As to count 1, felony murder. It's a sentence of the court. You serve a term within the Michigan Department of Corrections for the rest of your natural life without parole.
Thankfully, Shonda's going to prison for life for what she did. And there is no chance of parole. I have so far been checking like a mad woman to try to see if there is any chitter chatter out there about her going for an appeal. I don't believe in any way, shape, or form she would ever get it, but I'm keeping an eye on it anyways, just in case. And Paul was supposed to have his sentencing on January 29th, but now that has been postponed to the end of next month. And I was hoping that by the time I was able to sit down and film this video, it was like planned to where we would know what was happening with Paul, because that's honestly what I'm very much so interested in, because he's shown what he's capable of doing, and he also has a lot of life ahead of him. And so there's obviously a fear there of some sort of reoffense if he isn't sentenced to a very long time. Obviously, that's a lot to think about. I'm just very interested to see what ends up happening with that, because technically he's only been charged with child abuse. I'll have to update you on what happens with Paul at the end of next month when he finally goes to his sentencing. After Shonda's arrest, Adam filed for divorce, thankfully, and attempted to get full custody of G, their little son. But unfortunately, he passed away months later, and now G is in the care of other family members. He is safe and well from what I've seen. And honestly, I'm so thankful, because there is no telling if this abuse would have ever eventually trickled down to him. And then while Timothy's biological father did speak to authorities, it doesn't seem that he has made any statements publicly about what happened to his son. And I'm sure there's a lot of guilt being carried with that, because he knew Shonda was not supposed to have Timothy, still sent Timothy to live with her. I have seen that he stated he had no idea there was abuse happening in the house, but I don't know how valid that article is, because it does seem like he has completely maintained his silence. This is his son, and I don't think he had anything to do with the trial. Like, I just feel like Timothy was failed all the way around. Instead, it seems that Adam's family and the community have come together to support Timothy's siblings, fight for change, as well as advocating for justice. On July 17th, 2022, the First Baptist Church of Muskegon held a memorial service for Timothy. So again, I don't even think his own father held any sort of memorial service for him. His aunt, again on Adam's side, also started a GoFundMe to be able to hold a funeral for him, and his cousins also created a Facebook group that is called Justice for Timothy Ferguson to keep people updated and again advocate for justice. So seeing that there are people that have come forward and have been doing whatever they can to remember him and to keep his name out there and help the public and do these memorials and remember him as more than just a victim is exactly what he's always deserved. I have never heard a more revolting case in my entire time looking into true crime. And I honestly think that if Paul had gone to trial, he would have gotten a much harsher sentencing than I think he will end up getting now that he has pleaded guilty. And I honestly am also a little upset that he's not facing the same murder charges as his mother, especially when he seemed to be the one that was physically executing all of these punishments. He claims that he was just the enforcer for his mom. You will never convince me that he didn't enjoy every single moment of it, which is why I have such a fear that he won't be sentenced to very long and will have the opportunity to reoffend in the future. I don't know how any of this was able to happen. And I honestly don't know if there's even anything that can be done at this point to prevent things like this from ever happening again. But what I do know is that people need to know about this. Like, I was shocked that I had not heard about this, seen about this. It wasn't in my suggestion form. Like, it was just not out there the way you would see other things out there. And it highlights a lot of different flaws in our system, in, CPS, and things like custody. I just feel like there's much larger conversations to be had, ways that someone would have been able to keep Timothy in their line of sight to make sure that something like this didn't happen to him. People need to hear this to know the signs. They need to remember Timothy, a little boy who deserved to live in a safe home with someone that actually loved him. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and go, you guys. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to Timothy's story. I know it was a very difficult one to listen to, but I just think the importance of it outweighs that. And I just want people to know Timothy himself instead of just Shonda Vander Ark's name that's been plastered all over absolutely everything. Timothy cannot keep getting lost even after his death. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Hallen fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together or bring them justice together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.